I retired from the Indian Army a year and a half ago. Well, I've been busy, mostly with youth engagement, but this year and a half has given me time to reflect, to contemplate on my life, on my career in the army spanning 4 decades. Over the past year, I've given several talks on military leadership. I've touched upon qualities of leadership like bravery, leading by personal example, turning adversity into opportunities, and so on. The other day, I was talking to some of my subordinates in service at a social event, and somebody commented that he had given his best performance ever while he was serving with me. Now, I have heard that comment earlier as well, but since I was in a reflective mode, I asked him why. And his reply gave me my topic of the talk today. And I realized also that I owe all my successes in a large measure to just this quality of leadership. It's a quality of leadership that's very important, but not taught explicitly in the leadership manuals. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not taught explicitly, but it is something that is practiced in the Indian Army. It's not new, it's practiced in the Indian Army ever since its inception by its very ethos and culture. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about empathy, an emotion that connects. During my childhood, I grew up in an Air Force camp. My father was in Indian Air Force. He was an aircraft engine mechanic. I remember as a 9-year-old, we were living in a 2-room house in an Air Force camp when one evening my father returned home very late, way past dinner time. He was tired but very happy. We could see it in his beaming face. We could see it in his actions. He picked up my younger brother who was 6 years old and twirled him around. He caught all 3 of us siblings in a big hug while my mother readied dinner for him. She quickly added a hastily prepared kheer to match his mood of happiness. Over dinner, he told us that that day there was a technical snag in an aircraft engine which they were not able to locate. That aircraft had an important commitment to fly the next day. I still remember his coordinate hunters, those British fighter aircrafts. Try as they may, they couldn't locate the fault, and one by one, others, his colleagues, gave up and went home. But he decided to stay back, determined to find the fault. Perseverance actually paid off, and eventually he was able to locate the fault. And then, as he tells us, fixing it was easy. His chief engineering officer was very relieved. He was very pleased with his work, and he gave him a big shabash, a pat on his back. And he was all praises for him. A few words of genuine appreciation, and that made my father so happy. That made him work so much harder. And not only my father, his entire ecosystem. His children were happy, his wife was happy, his whole family was happy, all with a few words of genuine appreciation. What a positive spiral of happiness. That always remained with me. Years later, when I joined the army, I realized that the army soldiers in India mostly stay away from their families. Most of you must be staying with your families, right? It's tough to imagine that a soldier gets only 60 to 80 days at home with his family in a year. And when we serve in operational areas, we do alternate between operational areas and peacetime areas. So when we serve in operational areas, all of us, including officers, we stay without our families. When my younger son was 9 years old, I had spent only 3.5 with him in those very formative years. And as far as soldiers are concerned, some of them do not live with their families throughout their lives, throughout the service, because of commitments of joint family, etc. Whenever I spoke to the soldiers, that positive spiral of happiness always remained at the back of my mind. And I would talk to them informally, I would ask them about their families, I would ask them about his parents, I would ask him about his siblings, his children. Later at night, I would try and remember all the details and note them down. I literally mugged up the family details of all soldiers in my company. It's a little hard work to remember the details of more than 100 personnel, but anytime it came up in a conversation and I asked a soldier about his mother's ailment or his wife's pregnancy or his son's performance in school, that the look on that soldier's face more than made up for the happiness, more than made up for the hard work that I had put in trying to remember those names. There is so much joy in giving happiness to others. I think even more than a material comfort, an emotional connect goes a long way. In a way, I tried continuing doing now also, even after my retirement, what I did then. I carry with me a wallet or a keychain, something not very expensive. But when I find a sentry at the gate, a watchman at the gate, or a Uber cab driver, or a lift man whose work ethics or sincerity I like, I just pull out this. A small gift with few words of appreciation to set off that positive spiral of happiness in his ecosystem. Whoever you're dealing with, you can only connect when your empathy quotient is high, because only then can you truly appreciate his state of mind. Allow me to narrate an anecdote. One of a very brave and a Joshila soldier in my battalion, one of my favorites, at some point of time, he started creating disciplinary problems, picking up fights, insubordination, something which is not taken lightly in the army. One evening, I went down to the barracks when they were having their bi-weekly happy hour, joined the boys for a tot of rum, and over a drink, I had a long chat with this individual. At the end of an hour when I was leaving, I could see that he was relieved and feeling much better. Then on, there was a marked improvement in his rebellious behavior. So not only being appreciated, merely being heard can be fulfilling at times. Conversely, there is nothing more disheartening than your boss not paying attention to you or checking his WhatsApp messages on his mobile while you're trying to put your message across to him. And sometimes, listening to your subordinates can even have unintended outcomes. When the Uri tragedy struck, where we lost 18 soldiers in a terror attack, I was the corps commander in Kashmir. Translated, that means I was in charge of all the army deployed in whole of Kashmir. So we lost those soldiers. It happened on my watch. It was a sad day for me. Overwhelmed with grief and seething with anger, I was discussing the response options with my team, my field commanders, my chief operations officer. I urged them to be bold. while discussing these options. And we discussed a range of options, from conservative to reckless, from safe to spectacular. And we realized that the grief and the anger in the nation was immense. The grief of the country could only be overcome by army giving a bold and a befitting response. And surgical strikes happened. So sometimes listening to your subordinates with an open mind can open your mind to imaginative possibilities. After that, after Srinagar, I moved on promotion to Delhi as a Chief of Integrated Defence Staff. That was my last assignment before I retired. One of the additional responsibilities and an onerous responsibility entrusted to me was creation of the National War Memorial. It was a huge honor, and by virtue of its location in Lutyens, Delhi, near the India Gate, several restrictions were imposed on us by the Central Vista Committee, by the Delhi Urban Arts Commission, by the New Delhi Municipal Council, and many more. One of the restrictions that was imposed on us and that rankled me severely was a height restriction of 1.5 meters. A National War Memorial with a column of only 1.5 meters. None shorter than a short man like me. I tried my best. We went to the Ministry of Defence, but the general view was that if another department has placed a restriction, there must be a good reason for it. So one day, while walking around the construction site with my Chief Project Officer, General Parashar, we had been discussing this concern of mine often, and he was completely in agreement with me. So on an impulse, I told him, come, let's go to your site office and gather your team there. When all his 4 or 5 members of the team had gathered from all 3 services, this is what I told them, that I am not comfortable with this height restriction of 1.5 meters. I know it's a restriction imposed on us by other bodies, but I would feel guilty if I leave behind a memorial, a war memorial at national level with a height of 1.5 meters. Just like I used to feel guilty whenever we returned after an encounter with terrorists where we had a fatal casualty. I would feel guilty that why did I come back alive when so-and-so did not. Perhaps an overdeveloped conscience is unduly harsh on itself. Be that as it may, this was my last assignment before I retired. And I didn't want to retire with that retired hurt feeling. So we could either hide behind the restrictions imposed upon us, or we could raise the level, pun intended. And then, within 30 minutes, we aligned their needs from national to organizational, from mine to theirs, individually. It got them all fired up. And then this team went around convincing all the stakeholders. And today, we have a National War Memorial at the India Gate with a column standing proud at 42 meters of height, a befitting memorial. Thank you. A befitting memorial to the soldiers, sailors and air warriors, 26,000 of them who laid down their lives for the country. If I had told them, if I had merely ordered them to go and try explaining it to the various departments, why we need a taller column? I suspect they could have come back after a couple of days to say, sir, we tried, but no one's listening. So they had to be fired up. They had to be motivated. They had to take ownership of the problem as their own. And they did. And I retired in peace. As I look back on these anecdotes and many more, I realize that I owe all my achievements to the teamwork of my teams. And I was very fortunate that I connected well with my soldiers, my subordinates, still do. But I was never mollycoddling them. In fact, my image has been that of a hard taskmaster. And the difference is they did the hard work willingly. Empathy is the biggest quality that helps you create a genuine connect. And it can't be faked. You have to feel it genuinely. Only then can you truly connect. And as we just saw, empathy is reciprocal. If you care, they care. And lastly, remember, every individual is a hero in his or her own family, the center of his universe. So whether it's your boss or your mate, we must treat everyone equally with respect. Jai Hind, and thank you.